record on this computer. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to a special Monday night edition of the mock interview prep that we've been doing here over the last couple of weeks during this coronavirus shutdown. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope that everybody is staying healthy and staying safe. Due to unfortunate technical difficulties, we're unable to host this live on Facebook in the way that we usually do. So we're going to do it in the way that I guess traditional webinars usually go, which is actually through Zoom directly. Today we have our we have Corey. He's back to help us again with doing some more mock interviews. He works at a leading tech company here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he serves as a recruiter. And with Corey, we have La Renee. La Renee Hill is a nonprofit and marketing professional located here in San Jose, and she's going to be mock interviewed for a couple of roles that we're going to put up here on the screen really shortly. The rules of this entire interaction are pretty simple. If you are pretty simple in the sense that Corey will interview La Renee and offer feedback at the end of these questions. And for those of you who are here on the line watching, you are more than welcome to offer your comments. You're more than welcome to offer feedback and also ask questions so that you may learn to do this better for yourself as you go out into interviewing during this time. Without further ado, I'm going to actually go ahead and hand it off to Corey, and he can welcome himself and also welcome La Renee and get this process started. I will go ahead and fade into the background for the remainder of this until the very end, and then come back on to conclude. Corey, I'm going to let you have it from here.
Thanks, Albert, and thank you everyone for tuning in and joining, or for watching this recording later on. Sorry with the technical difficulties, but luckily Albert is a great problem solver, and we were able to find a creative solution to make sure that we get all this great content out to everyone. And I do have the Zoom chat open on the side of my screen as well. So if you guys do have comments or questions, I'll be able to see those and hopefully address them kind of real time as they come in. I'll pause at the end of each question as I give feedback, and then looking for questions and folks in the chat to help call out. But yeah, Albert gave me a really great introduction. This is week 3, I believe, of doing week four, I think, of doing these mock interview sessions. During the first session, we were talking with Jen Monique, and basically for folks who want to go back and find that recording, if you are looking for advice on maybe how to explain a gap in employment, or if you took some time off and are trying to get back into the workforce, that was something we covered with Jen, and she was specifically looking for a product manager role and interviewing for that, and she was doing a bit of a career switch. So if you're looking for any of those types of tips, go ahead and find that very first mock session interview from 2 weeks ago. And then last week I spoke with Zach, and he was looking for a IT/site reliability engineering type position. So we covered some of those types of questions, and he's also looking to move from an individual contributor role into a manager position for the first time. So if you guys are, if any of these types of situations apply to you, please go back and check out some of those previous videos. I'm sure you'll find them super, super helpful. But today we have La Renee. I'm so excited to speak with her. I always feel like we should definitely commend and applaud folks who have this high amount of courage and enthusiasm to put themselves out there in front of everyone. But she's also hopefully going to be getting a lot of really good feedback and helping her prepare for her upcoming interviews. And I will kick it off to her to give maybe a little bit of background and context for some of the folks at home in terms of what your background is and what you're looking for, just in case they have an opportunity or if they know anyone who could be helping you out in the future.
All right. Thank you so much, Corey and Albert, for having me. My name is Lauren A. Hill, and I'm currently working in the nonprofit. I have a background in public health and public administration. At first, I wanted to work in creating programs, but since starting my current job, which is at SourceWise, which is a nonprofit organization that helps seniors and anyone living with a disability in the Santa Clara County area find resources and programs that can help them. I work on the marketing and branding side of branding side of the nonprofit agency. So I help out with writing a newsletter, or having updating the website and posting events, and actually attending the events and going out into the out into the community to raise awareness about SourceWise and what we do. I'm currently looking for a shift. I'm trying to shift my job, shift my career into the marketing and event planning realm, not realm, but field. And I'm looking for a remote or something that is a little bit more flexible with my schedule.
Perfect. I love that. And so, and that was not an interview question for those folks who may be wondering. That's just like her giving herself a plug and quick introduction. So yes, if any of you know anyone who have opportunities that would potentially be a good fit.
How's it going, eh?
Oh, let's make sure.
Pretty well.
Let's see if we can.
All the what?
Oh, perfect. There we go. So yes, if anyone does have any opportunities for La Renee, especially as she was so brave and putting herself in front of all of you for learning purposes, that would be awesome. And if we could also show her some love in the chat and hopefully in the comments later on in the Facebook group when this goes up there, that would be awesome. So are you ready, La Renee, to start your mock interview session?
I am so ready. Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. So you probably know that this question is coming. So why don't you tell me about yourself?
Well, I am a creative individual who is looking to jump into the next career move, which is working in marketing as well as event planning. I have 3 years experience in event planning and at least almost 2 years experience in marketing.
You're doing great.
I just got really nervous. Oh,
It's okay.
I usually don't. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I'm currently working at SourceWise as a community resource specialist as well as an outreach coordinator. Where there's 2 parts of the job. There's actually interacting with the public, and then the second part of it is basically making sure that the SourceWise brand and how we market it SourceWise is the same across all different departments within SourceWise.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, no worries. That's a very good start. And it's okay to be nervous. I'm sure once you get into a flow, everything will start to come a whole lot easier. But also that's why we practice and we do these mock interview sessions before the real thing, so you can get
the Skype is not working.
some of that stuff out of the way. And for those folks who do dial in, please remember to put yourself on mute
For how long will it take?
when you join in. Albert, is there a way to, I guess, auto mute folks who join? I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm unmuting people as they join.
Okay,
So
perfect.
I'll do that, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so now in this mock interview session, one thing I wanted to do first was just kind of start with the general background first before explaining what type of role she would be potentially applying for. She's interested in a lot of different marketing positions, but I wanted to first give you folks an understanding of her background, let her kind of answer the tell me about yourself question, and then I can explain why I chose a certain position just based on her overall experience, which I think will be helpful, especially from a recruiting perspective. So some of the folks who are watching or watching this recording later can understand the thought process that goes behind understanding whether or not someone would be a potentially good fit for a role. And again, this is just based on resume only, which is what you guys have up in front of you right now, is her resume right here. Beautiful graphic, very, very colorful, very, very eye-catchy. So, as you can hear from her background, she did really focus and draw my attention to the fact that she has a marketing and event planning experience. She is coming from nonprofit into hopefully, or potentially into a corporate environment, which we'll talk about in a second. But because nonprofit, and you can even tell by her current job title right now, community resource specialist and outreach coordinator, it doesn't read automatically as a marketing type role, marketing, branding, or event-based role. So it's really good that she was actually able to provide some context about how her organization is structured and how the role operates. She said that there's basically two parts, right? The community-facing aspect, and then I believe it was internal-facing was the second part you said? Correct me if I'm
Internal. Yeah, it was internal and external.
internal and external. Perfect. Yeah, and I love that she gave that context because folks who may not have hired from nonprofit or have come from nonprofit backgrounds themselves, they may not understand how a community resource specialist is actually very similar to a event coordinator or something like that, which brings us to the job description that I picked out for her based on her experience, which could be a potential fit in a corporate environment, is this event marketing manager position at Oracle. And Albert is very, very excited and hyped that we chose his company for this example, I'm sure. But this is a event marketing manager position. Um, Renee does match the ideal target years of experience for this type of position. And given how her resume reads, which the very first bullet talks about event planning, presentation opportunities, and then she also talks about her content creation and management from a branding and marketing perspective, which is why I chose this position as like a very similar transition role from nonprofit into corporate. So for those of you who are looking to move from nonprofit into a corporate setting, I think this mock interview session is going to be fantastic and very, very helpful for you. And for those of you who are interested in the nonprofit space, La Renee can actually give you a little bit of insight right now in terms of what that interview process looks like, because she was applying for SourceWise and other types of companies. So why don't you just give some folks some helpful context about what to expect during the interview process there?
So when you're going into a nonprofit organization interview, you want to keep in mind that a lot of the questions that they do ask is a lot of it's a situation-based question. So, for example, if you're going for a social working position, they would throw questions out to you like, "Oh, how would you motivate a client to go motivate a client to try out rehab services if all things fail?" Or for example, if you're going through a public health job and it's kind of like a research job, what type of resources would you use to research the specific topic that we're going for? For example, like if you're going for American Cancer Society or the American Heart Association, American Heart Association. I'm sorry, I'm not able to remember the corporation, but American Heart Association. A lot of times when I interview for SourceWise, this was actually my first panel interview for for a nonprofit, which had my current coworkers and my actual director through that. And what they did was they asked a lot of situation-based questions, as well as some technical questions as well, like what type of software did you use at your previous job, and how comfortable were you learning new software, and what else did they ask me on? They also did it in the second part of the interview with my nonprofit is that they did a testing. A lot of my job requires me to be on the phone and interacting with clients who may call in looking for resources. So they did 3 test calls, which was 2 to connect someone to a program outside of SourceWise. The second one was connecting them to a program within SourceWise. And the last one was to gather logistical information about a outreach an outreach event that we were being invited to. And then the other test that they had was attention to detail. So basically, they gave 2 printouts of like a newsletter, and they wanted me to find the issues in there. So when you do interview for a nonprofit, you may get a panel. So unfortunately, SourceWise is the only panel interview that I went to. Other than that, for other nonprofits, I usually, for example, I worked at MidPenn. I think I interviewed with 2 people, and they were just both my coworkers. Well, actually, one was my manager, and yeah, one was my manager and one of my coworker. But it wasn't like a panel interview. They was just handing off situational based questions. If you get what I mean, guys.
No, and
Sorry,
that's
it's
super, super helpful.
all
So
your questions.
no, that's great. And so yeah, for those folks who are looking to get into nonprofit, sounds like you should expect a lot of the situation-based or hypothetical type interview
Mhm.
questions. It also sounds like they have their version of like a technical screen where they put you in I would say real world scenarios. In her case, she had to do like 3 mock phone calls, right? We're directing them to outside resources, et cetera, et cetera. So there will still be some technical component of the role where they're testing your technical capability to do and execute and perform well at the job. So those are all really, really great insights, and also be potentially prepared for a panel style interview. Which is a little bit different than how most, I believe, larger corporations do their typical interview processes, which are normally one-on-one, as opposed to you interviewing with 2 to 4 people sometimes at once. So thanks for that, La Renee. And also, I figured I'd give you a little bit more time to, shake off some of the nerves, get more comfortable as we start to dive further down into the mock interview session. Alrighty, so now I do have your resume up in front of me. So your next interview question, which I think will be very helpful for folks who are watching at home as well, is along these lines. So La Renee, I've noticed that on your resume, you were at Mid Open Housing for a little over a year, and you've been at SourceWise now for a little bit over a year. Why are you looking to change companies again?
So I'm realizing a lot with the nonprofits, there isn't really much movement within the company. I see a lot of within both nonprofit organizations, only seen upper management move up versus to someone who's starting out. So I really didn't see much value. I didn't really see much value in the work. Sorry, I said that wrong. I really didn't see that the value that I was putting in the work was being recognized, especially after changes within changes in uh, within changes that were made since me starting the position. And I'm also looking for something that's a little bit on the creative side. I'm starting to realize with both with positions that I was in, I saw that everything was very how do you say it was very repetitive, and it didn't allow me to be creative within the position that I wanted. I mean, the position that I was in, it was always roadblocks on why we couldn't do this or that wouldn't work. I wasn't heard at the company, basically.
Okay. The answer to that question, I think, was a little bit over a minute, closer to probably 2 minutes, and that's okay. I know that there's some nerves involved, and as you get to practice and kind of hone in and critique your answer, I'm sure it'll also get a lot more succinct as well. Overall, I think it's a great start. Um, I think you focused a lot on the negatives at some of your previous employers, which depending on who you talk to and how your hiring managers or recruiters feel about that. It may or may not go over very well, talking in a negative light about your past employers. Essentially, what the question is trying to understand, and for those folks who have moved companies maybe every year and a half, every 2 years, consistently, I'm sure that these are questions that you should be practicing and anticipating for. The main thing that they want to understand, right, is if we hire and invest and train you, will you be likely to stay and provide value for our organizations or our teams or our company over time. And so when you're looking to kind of ease some of those questions and concerns, I think it's always good to focus a little or draw their attention away from the movement themselves or talk about your previous employers, but talk more so about what skills or experience you can bring to the table, and also talk a little bit about how your experience matches what they may be looking for, and kind of turning the question around, right? It's not so much about like, why do you really want to leave? It's more so like, if we hire you, are you going to stay, and what are you going to bring to our company for us in this role? And so at the end of your practice interview question, I was trying to pull up this job description to see if maybe you would be starting to steer the conversation more towards how your experience, which you were talking a little bit about how you're doing a great job, but you feel like you're not potentially being recognized and giving and be given the growth opportunities you're looking for. I wanted you to either give me some examples or steer the conversation towards the job description itself, because you do have a lot of overlapping skill set, especially in the event planning space, right?
Right.
And I can see some messages from Peter Wong in the chat. You are doing great. Keep it up. So thank you so much. Do you want to give this question another go? Are you up for that?
Yes, I am up for it. Just let me just see. I'm just trying to think, how can I phrase it better? I'll give it a go. I'll try it again.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Now, let's try and do two things, right? First, let's talk a little bit more about your transferable skill set, which is marketing, event planning, branding, social media content, advertising, and also tie this a little bit to the job description itself. All right, so here we go. So, La Renee, I've noticed from your resume, which I'll pull up right here, you were at Mid Open Housing for a little bit over a year, and you're at a similar time frame with SourceWise. Why are you looking to potentially change companies again?
So I really liked what I did at both MidPen and SourceWise, and I wanted to gain more experience and expand on my previous experience. For example, with MidPen, I worked with a small community of senior citizens, and I would host events for them to boost community leisure among the community. And I wanted to do that at a larger scale. Instead of just having my one community, I would have multiple senior communities instead join in the fun, because I feel like that I'm going all over the place.
You're doing great. Keep it up. You're doing great.
I just
expanding your communities, which led you to SourceWise.
Which led me to SourceWise. Thank you. Which led me to SourceWise, where that's where I gained more experience in marketing and how to reach Santa Clara County community by raising awareness about SourceWise and what we do. So I'm looking to change into something else, because I feel like I would want to expand on a more national level versus to a community or a county-wide area.
Okay. gonna find a way to like scroll down here so I can see. Awesome. So that was really really good. I love how you changed the vibe. It was much more of a positive experience with your previous employers. You also hit really hard on your event planning experience and how you are looking to grow and build that, and that's why you moved over to SourceWise. So I think you made a huge adjustment, and it was great. I was trying to give you like the
Okay.
visual signs that that you're doing really really awesome. So I think the only piece when you're practicing this one more time is figure out a way to kind of tie this back to the job in which you're applying. In this case, Oracle's event planning manager position. So I was trying to highlight here, right? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've been planning events at scale, and you know that this role would involve planning conferences, multi-city conferences, roadshows, product launches, etc. And you've planned events for, I don't know, 100 something people at one time, and I had limited budget, etc., right? Like, so you have to draw some similarities and overlays within your experience to how that would match for a corporate type position. Make sense?
Okay.
Cool.
Yes.
All right, you're doing great. You are doing great. For those of you who are listening, as you can see here, that there is a seniority level listed. La Renee does have about 3 years of experience, so she's kind of in that middle area between like associate and I guess like senior associate bands. And so when you are applying for these types of roles, I would probably prepare for a lot more research and behavioral based questions. So like the tell me about yourself, why do you want to work here, as well as like, tell me about a time when you had to do blah, blah, blah. So I would practice more on those and a little bit less on like, I would say like brain teaser questions and things like that, unless you're applying for a consulting firm, just to give you guys some context of where you should be steering and focusing your studies. Okay, so next question. So, La Renee, you currently have about 3 years of experience in nonprofit. Sounds like in event planning related roles. How does your experience at nonprofit transfer over to a corporate environment like Oracle?
So I think my don't say I think with my experience with planning for small events at my nonprofit, I know that when going to plan for something, you have to really. Can I just start over? I'm sorry. My mind is going. My mind is giving me multiple answers, and I can't simmer down to one. But
Okay, it's fine. We can hit the reset
I,
button. And I guess as a quick coaching moment for everyone, as you're doing these practice sessions, and I'm sure you're going to have experiences just like La Renee's having right now. If you have all these ideas running in your head and you're not sure how you want to structure and organize them, take out a piece of paper and a pen and just start writing all of them down as fast as you can before you forget, and then use your visual cues to arrange your thoughts later on and craft your story. Obviously, she won't have that luxury to do that now because we're doing a mock live session, but for those of you at home who are going to practice later, when this type of situation happens to you, that's what I would do. Just write everything all out at once. Who cares the order, or like if you have good writing or ugly writing, get all your ideas down on paper, and then you can start to figure out how you want to actually rearrange them later. Okay, La Renee, I just bought you like 30 more seconds. So here we go. You may now start again.
okay. Can you ask the question one more
I
time?
will. And this will be a common question that anyone's going to get when you are moving from nonprofit to corporate. So just keep that in mind. So you have about 3-ish years of nonprofit experience, all in the marketing, events, planning / branding space. How do you feel your experience in nonprofit would transfer over to a corporate environment here at a company like Oracle?
With my 3 years experience, I feel it would transfer over because when dealing with a nonprofit, you're dealing with the budget. So you're actually dealing with that budget. And when you're doing event planning, that is one of the main factors you have to pay close attention to. So, and well as paying attention to any hiccups when it goes to when it comes to event planning and actually seeing that event through. With my experience with event planning, I've planned events as far as small workshops all up into from small workshops uh, senior walks. And it did take a lot of time, and most of the time I wasn't working with stakeholders. Sometimes it would just be me planning the logistics, the travel, the planning. I'm so sorry, Corey.
It's okay. It's okay.
Uh,
I think what you're trying to draw
I,
the attention to is like you have very limited resources now, and if you were to go over to a larger corporation with less budget constraints, you would have much more resources. And so basically, you're saying like, imagine what I could do if I had more resources at my disposal and I wasn't a one woman show.
right. I think what I struggle with the most with that question is one, I never answered a question like that, and like I don't know how to answer a question like that.
And that's okay. That's okay.
That
That's why we're here to provide these learning opportunities. And I don't believe, most companies would just come out directly and word it and say it like how I did in this practice question. I did it just because A, it's a great teaching moment for everybody, but also B, just for you to know, like even in your tell me about yourself pitch or your elevator pitch or your networking talks, this is something that's going to be in the back of their minds the whole time anyways, even if they're not directly asking you about it, especially since your job title doesn't match exactly what it is that they're looking for, right? So that's just why I wanted you to practice this type of question. Now, how would I go about this question? I think your natural instinct is very, very good, right? You're automatically leaning towards the skill set itself and how that would be relatable and transferable from one company to another, right? Like if you're doing nonprofit for I'm sorry, if you were doing event planning for a biotech firm and you wanted to go into cloud sales or software sales for Oracle, right? You would make the same argument, right? Well, event planning is event planning. At its core, it's the same, right? Budget constraints, logistics, operations, project management. And then you would just, the audience would maybe be different, or the size of the event may have to scale, 10x, 5x, 2x, depending on where you come from. So overall, I think your instinct was great, which is always good, right? It's harder to teach instinct um, than it is to coach like the actual words and sentences that you're going to be using. So that's definitely a very, very good thing. Also, I think a deeper knowledge and understanding of the role itself or the company that you're applying to get to would also be very, very helpful. So, and I'm not saying Oracle has to be the company that you're targeting. Before we started recording, I know that you were talking about your love for video games. And so I do know that one of the other companies you were looking at was Bandai, right? Bandai and Namco. So potentially you could be much more excited and enthusiastic about doing research for that type of company, right? But what I would say is I would do a little bit more research ahead of time and understand, okay, what goes into planning an Oracle size event, right? Are
right.
there 1,000 people? Are there 5,000, 10,000? Are there only a few hundred people? This one also talks about organizing events for, I believe, developers. It was somewhere in the job title, right? So you also need to probably understand a little bit more about like what is a developer, right? Like who are developers for Oracle? What types of events would they need me to organize and plan? And because the more information that you have, the better you'll be able to kind of tailor and pitch your story. For example, if you did some research on what type of social media marketing does Oracle do, right? And then you could be like, well, I know, for example, that you are looking for someone who has social media advertising experience. From the job description, you mentioned emails, tweets, Facebook posts. I've noticed, your more recent posts from Oracle were related to blah, blah, blah. At my company at SourceWise, I also manage our company Facebook and Twitter account. And, we have similar marketing and advertising strategies. For example, blah, 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 blah. Right? If you were able to bring in like a concrete example that draws direct parallels, as a hiring manager or a recruiter, I'd be like, wow, okay, she has the skill set. Yes, I may have to teach her like how Oracle plans events or what a developer does, but at the core, I don't need to train her how to do social media marketing. I don't need to teach her how to organize an event. She's already done that, right? Does that help?
Yes, that does.
Okay,
That helps.
perfect. Perfect. Peter Wong showing a lot of love in the chat. Thank you, Peter. You do have
Peter.
superpowers. We are going to uncover them today. Okay, are you ready for your next question?
Yes.
All right. So, Laura Nate, what was the largest event that you've organized, and what challenges did you face when you were putting that event together?
Mm, I'm sorry. I'm thinking one. I should automatically have one. The largest event that I ever planned was the at Midpen, and that's where I organized a senior walk to celebrate the, I think it was the senior
Why you're
senior
starting to forget it.
Huh?
Oh, nope. Keep going. It was someone who I think just dialed in and was off mute.
It was to raise awareness about senior Americans. So one of the biggest challenge for me was actually promoting the event. Since Midpen Housing is a residential nonprofit, so so a lot of the people that I was trying to get to participate in the event, they don't have computers, and they don't have computers, and most of them did not speak English. Most of the people that I was trying to get more involved in the senior walk were of Asian descent, and they were Russian as well. So actually trying to have more residents come out and participate and enjoy and get into the walk was very hard. So I really had to create a very eye-catching flyer for them to post on their doors to let them know that we're going to be doing a walk on this day, and also connecting with the Russian and Asian communities within the residential place to let their friends know, like, hey, we're having a senior walk on this day. After doing that, the end result was I was able to get, there was about 175 residents there. I was able to get at least 50 of the residents to come out and participate in the walk. As well as that, I had to plan for by them doing this walk, what would they get in the end? So I actually planned and I created these goodie bags for them to receive after participating in the event. At first it was very hard because I didn't have anyone to help me on there, but luckily I was able to arrange time on my schedule after hours to actually create these goodie bags and get them to the residents. So that is one of the biggest events that I have organized, and that was the challenge of having residents come out, as well as creating the goodie bags for it.
Good. And I could tell you were leaning on the STAR technique when you were walking through that framework. So that was awesome. The situation was very, very clear. Task, action, and the result also very, very clear. Very easy to follow. So for those folks who are looking for an example of how to do a STAR technique or STAR method or STAR, that was very, very, very good. In terms of the example itself, now, just from a recruiter or hiring manager perspective, you did use an example from your prior role, which was over 2018, I believe,
Mhm.
2017 to 2018. So it could have been from up to almost 3 years old, which you did answer the question, right? It was the largest event you've planned, but it may raise a concern that you haven't planned any larger events in the last almost 2 years or year and a half while at SourceWise. Um, Also, because of the nature of this role, it does involve a high amount of social media advertising, right? And at least it's implying that as it writes this job description. And in your example, it was kind of the opposite, right? You couldn't use any social media advertising. So
Right.
in terms of a skill set matching perspective, I feel like if you had chosen a different example, which would be able to kind of highlight more recent experience, but also talk about some of the transferable skills that they're looking for, I think that would have been a much more powerful of an example. However, I did like the fact that it was complex and that you had to find a creative solution because, hey, like you would have done social media advertising, but your audience isn't on social media. They don't have computers. And I think you were trying to say that there's a language barrier um,
Mhm.
within both of the different communities. So that part I actually really, really liked. And I feel like you should have uh, uh, really emphasized that more. And then drawn my attention to the fact that basically, look, I'm a really great problem solver. And so if any type of crazy situation happens at this job, look at what I've had to deal with already in the past. But
Mhm.
that part I really, really did like about your overall example. Very, very good. I also would have liked to hear at the beginning right away, like what was the size of the event. At any tech company that you'll know that you apply to, you may notice that we're all very we as I can't speak for everybody, but tech companies tend to be very data oriented and driven, even in non-engineering roles. So right off the bat, I just would have loved to hear in your S, right? Oh yes, when I was at MidPenn, I had to plan a senior walk, and ultimately there was about 100 or I think you said 50, but ultimately there was around 50 to 75 participants. But I had organized for roughly over 100 people in the community. This is the situation. Blah 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 blah. Right?
Right.
Give me a little bit more data and information. Right? Like how many flyers did you have to create? Right? What did you build the flyers in? Because I'm sure there are some marketing tools and other skills that you can highlight through this example. Right? When you created these flyers, or again showing your creativity. I don't know if you speak Russian and or Mandarin or Japanese or whatever Asian languages, right? How did you figure out how to translate your flyers into the proper languages, right? And,
Right.
and and when you said I had to create a really creative flyer to get their attention, like to talk, highlight a little bit more about your creativity, which is going to be a very valuable skill set in any marketing department, right? So I feel like there were really great gems that you could have expanded on, which would have really enhanced your answer.
Right. And Corey, with my because okay, so with my experience at SourceWise, yes, I have planned a large event, but I wouldn't consider it like as large, because it's kind of different. It's difficult to explain, and I don't want to go on and on tangent about what it
Hmm
is.
hmm
And I don't want to lie and say it was this many people when actuality it
Totally.
was.
Yep. Definitely should not do that.
Um, but I did do advertisement for it, but it wasn't like we at SourceWise we don't really track it, like how many people was it? Well, we in a sense we do, but in actuality we really don't. If you get what I'm saying,
I think
like
I do.
okay,
But basically
I
for like for how do you word it, for application purposes, or when you're applying for jobs or writing a resume, updating a resume, yeah, you should probably want to track some of those metrics, even if it's on your own, right? Like you have your own little Google sheet or your own little Excel sheet to kind of get some numbers, because in any tech space, especially marketing these days is so data driven, you're going to want to have some data and numbers to kind of walk someone through your examples where possible, right? Like
Right.
if you're going to be talking about a social media advertising campaign that you did for SourceWise, they're definitely going to ask you for some data, right?
Right.
So even if your company doesn't normally track it, I think you should start to do that on your own, if that makes sense.
And when I did see some tracking, I really didn't see a lot of people like um, retweeting or resharing, or it was like probably like 2 to 3 people out of the 10,000 people we send. We send out. Well, I feel like my job isn't really transferable. I know anything's transferable. It's just that I can't really explain it on paper, and that's what gives me. I get really difficult. It becomes very difficult for me because I can't really put it into words because it's so many moving parts, and I feel like I begin to get really hard on myself, as you can see, and I'll talk to myself and like, oh, that's wrong, and I think that's what really um, gives me a difficult time with interviewing, is that I'm into my head too much and I can't naturally speak, because I don't even naturally speak like this, where it's like and ah and all of this stuff. Like when I'm confident about something, like I'm on the nose on it. But when it's like I thought I was confident about it, but now it's like, oh my God, I didn't do anything right. I didn't research right. I don't know myself very well, and I should know myself well, but I don't know. I guess it's just nerves and me just being extra hard on myself.
Oh, it's
So
okay. It's no, don't even worry about it. It's okay. Um, uh, a lot of us are perfectionists, and we're definitely hard on ourselves, which I think is very, very good. And it's also great to be self-aware. I think that's also a really great superpower, that anyone should have. And it's been almost like over a year since you've interviewed, and so it's just like riding a bike. As you start to practice and do more of these, to your point, you'll have less of those verbal pauses, and everything will just start to really click, and I'm sure you'll get into your groove as you go on and practice. And in terms of like how to make your skill set transferable, that's also kind of what we're all here for, you as well, trying to help you kind of draw those connections between your experience and kind of what other companies may be looking for. And you are getting a lot of great comments in the chat from Paula, and Agnes. So thank you so much for being so brave, and also for being so vulnerable and putting yourself out here.
mm,
Okay, so are you ready for another question? And by the way, for folks who have questions for me or for La Renee, like why did you choose to answer it in this fashion? Or if there's any questions you want me to kind of run through with her, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm checking these periodically as well. Okay, next question. And let's see, let's do a situation-based or hypothetical question next. Ready?
yep, I'm ready. Mhm.
You got this. You got this. Here we go. So imagine we were going to host our annual developer conference, and I asked you to manage the whole event. Okay? Walk me through your initial project plan.
So first, I would actually set up a meeting with you to identify a couple of logistics, like who are my stakeholders, what type of event that we're trying to host. I know you said developer, but are we launching a new app, or are we doing a cloud testing, for example, and as well as any finding out the location and basic logistics. My next step would be to identify my stakeholders. So who can I call on to assist me with the operations and the operation of the events, as well as how can we how can we advertise this event as well. My next step would be to actually project manage target manage the project as it goes on. So so basically checking in with my stakeholders, checking in with my sponsor, which would be you, and then making sure that all the moving parts of this event is going according to the timeline that is set. And just making sure that everything comes together at one. And if there are any challenges, we would deal with it in a way where we would problem solve. For example, with I recently planned a vendors conference a little bit last year, and we had issues with the PowerPoint presentation that was supposed to be shown at the event. So luckily we were able to find out this problem before the actual event, and I was able to come in and troubleshoot with one of the stakeholders, troubleshoot the PowerPoint presentation with the stakeholder that was managing that task, and I was able to fix the problem, and we were able to, on the day of the event, we were able to have that run smoothly and work. I'm having a hard time structuring my answers, and I feel like, and this happens when I do interviews, when I have done interviews in the past, where like when I stop talking, I don't know if I should stop or not, or am I, like, when there's like a long pause, I'm like I'm not for sure if I answered the question or not. So I usually say, did I answer your question, or something like that.
Okay. No. And thank you for sharing this, because I'm sure this is something that some folks who are watching may also run into. So first things first. How do you, basically the first question was, how do I know if my answer is complete or if I should stop talking? So in general, I would say for these types of questions, you should be aiming for somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, somewhere in that general time frame. This answer for you was closer to like 4.5, almost 5. So you're kind of near that higher end, which is still in like what I would consider an acceptable range. So if your answer right away is like 2 minutes, or you feel like, oh, I definitely didn't give enough context, then you should definitely keep going. If you're way past 5 minutes, I think you should also kind of take that as like a time sensitive cue, like, okay, I think I should probably stop now and see if they have questions. So that right away, I think, is going to help. Second was, how do I know if I answered the question, which is kind of what you are also asking me. And that was something I was going to point out right away. So what was my original question to you that I had asked?
You asked, I literally forgot.
That's okay. That's okay. It happens all the time. Whenever there's an interview, folks lock in and they're starting to answer the question. And sometimes you even forget what the prompt was. So, the question I actually asked you was, walk me through your project plan. And what you actually did was you walked me through the entire planning process, and like even all the way up to the event, because we had started talking about, then I would talk to these stakeholders, then I would project manage, and then if there was any problems, I would also make sure that we fix those in a timely manner, for example, right? So actually the question was, walk me through your project plan. What you had done was you had told me how you would run the whole event all the way up until basically it started. So the original question was, walk me through your project plan. So first, I would say, great. See, you already could kind of sense that you didn't actually answer the question, which is good, because now you know how to go back and build and improve on it. Second tip, for any hypothetical question, I would always make sure that you take the time to ask some follow-up questions, clarifying questions before you start to dive in and answer. Right away, you're like, okay, well, step one is I'm getting a meeting with you, right? And then step two is I'm talking to those stakeholders, which is good because it shows you're action oriented. But I would first take a step back and think, okay, what information do I need before I start planning, or in this case, before I start designing my project plan for this developer conference? So
Mhm.
it could be things like, do I have a budget constraint? Or what is my budget for the event? How do you define developer conference? Because that will influence, my marketing strategy or whatever, right? And then you also have to give some context as to why you may be asking certain questions, because they may be wondering themselves, like, why do I need to explain what a developer conference is? Right? Like
Mhm.
everyone who works in tech knows what a developer conference is. But so right, it's just little things like that, and then that would help you frame your answer. And then the other question you asked was, how do I go about structuring my answer? And you actually did it probably without even noticing. When you're answering hypothetical questions, I always tell folks or clients, try and structure it around either key themes or steps. In your case, you had already started to put together some steps, right? Step one was talking to me. Step two was working with your stakeholders. Step three was project managing. And then step four was resolving any problems that would come up. So you actually had a structure for your answer. You just didn't even realize that you were putting a structure together. So
Mhm.
what I would do next time, and this also buys you more time to think about your answer before you start to actually go down, I would say, I would ask some clarifying questions first, and then I would say, okay, so when I'm thinking about my project plan, there's probably four components because there's no steps in a project plan, right? But in your case, I'll just use your example and kind of how you answered it. So in your case, you would say something like, well, there's at least four steps that I'm thinking right now. Step one is going to be some type of intake information gathering meeting with you. Step two is going to be identifying my stakeholders and then engaging my stakeholders for my project. Step three is going to be actually executing and project managing to the deadline. Step four would be making sure that I account for any types of challenges that I may run into during my project. So step number one is the intake meeting. When I'm going to meet with you, these are the things that I would want to make sure I iron out in my first meeting with you. For example, boom, 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 boom. Now, second was my stakeholder engagement. Perhaps from our interview or from you and I meeting, our stakeholders are going to be, catering, travel team, the
Mhm.
executive admins for all of my speakers that I need to organize. Maybe I'm going to bring in an external speaker to come and talk, right? Or maybe like, how am I going to get our partners involved, right? Oracle has partnerships probably with Google, with Apple, or whoever, right? Like we got to get all of your partners there, right? So like that's how I would kind of go go about structuring the answer, if that makes sense.
Right.
You have any questions? Because I know I did a lot of talking, so I'll just pause.
Um, no, you answered them because I'm all like, well, how would you said it? Get it together, girl. Um, with the question, because certain I find it very difficult for me with certain questions. Sometimes I don't actually know what the word means. So
And that's okay, because
yeah, so
maybe that should have been one of the questions, right? It's like, oh, so Mr. Interviewer, when you say walk me through the project plan,
mhm,
you're saying just to walk you through the plan, right? Like not actually executing the event. And then I would
mhm,
say, yes, La Renee, that's correct. I just want the plan. That would have changed your entire answer, right?
right.
hmm So maybe that could have been one of your first questions that you had asked before you started to dive in.
Mhm. And I think that yeah, that was the only question I had because I was so nervous about asking that because I didn't want to, when you have that the perception versus reality,
hmm hmm
and I always get caught up on the perception and not the reality. I think everyone does, and when asking certain questions like that, it's like, oh snap, I must be really dumb to not know what that means. But then again, in reality, there's so many different meanings to so many different things. So you have to ask, and there's, like teachers used to always say, there's no such thing as a dumb question. I have to keep that in mind.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Cool. Well done. Any question from Peter. In our interviews for these types of questions, we have a list of answers to hypothetical questions that the person will ask for context. We expect them to ask. Aha. Great insights, Peter. Thank you. So yes, for those folks who are preparing and practicing, they are expecting you to ask questions at the beginning. So make sure you are, and I would caveat that by saying, make sure your questions are what I would say like relevant or meaningful questions, right? You don't want to ask questions that basically don't help shift or strategize your answer in any way. Right. So for example, if in this particular example about planning the event, if maybe someone had asked like, where would the event be held? Right. The interviewer would turn it back on you and be like, well, that's your job as the event planner, is to tell me where I should host the event. Right. Like that's going to be one of the problems you're going to solve in this question ultimately, right? Is like where you can A, afford to put it, or B, from a marketing logistics perspective, should you organize it? Should it be in Vegas? Should you do it here in San Jose? Should you do it in San Francisco? Should you do it in Canada or Mexico or South Korea? I don't know, right? So that would be an example of a question where you probably wouldn't want to ask that. Okay, alrighty. Dun, dun, dun. Albert, how are we doing on time? Should we do one more question or should we pause here?
Let's do 2 more questions and
Okay.
then go from there. I have
Okay.
a stop at 7:40, so
Okay.
before we.
Lauren, how are you feeling? Are you up for a couple more?
I'm okay. Yes.
Okay, good, because I spent time drafting like 10 of these for you. So let's keep it going. All right. Dun, dun, dun. We did a hypothetical. Let's see. Okay, let's do this one. So, can you tell me about a time when you ran into a problem with one of your cross-functional partners or vendors, and how did you go about solving it?
Hmm, that's a great question. At SourceWise, we annually we give out vouchers to senior citizens who shop at farmers markets, and we work cross-functionally with our Meals on Wheels team. Now, with our Meals on Wheels team and working with information and awareness, we have 2 different skill sets. So one of the challenges that we did have and that I had is there wasn't a lot of communication on the side of Meals on Wheels. So it was a lot of me, a lot of times, oftentimes when there was an issue or or we didn't receive a report back from Meals on Wheels on how the event went when they gave out vouchers, I had to always initiate the conversation. So, so to better our relationship going forward, I made I compromised with the Meals on Wheels program because it was really hard for them to be technical with us as we were as technical, have the same technical level that information awareness would have. So I realized that they like face-to-face face-to-face communication. So that's what I compromised for them, is that instead of emailing them, because I would never get a reply back, I would go to them face to face and check in with them and see if they needed anything. And after I did the first initial face to face, after not two failed events, but 2 failed attempts of communicating and seeing how the first 2 events that we had went, after I did that first initial face to face, then our communication got better. And see, I get that awkward pause, and I'm like, oh snap, did I answer the question? But I think I answered the question. I know I answered the question, and I forgot to ask the context. Ah,
No, that's
okay.
okay. So that was the behavioral question. So you were meant to basically just pull on an example from the past. I wouldn't necessarily say you needed to ask a clarifying question unless you needed, additional context or anything like that. Um, the pause at the end was because I wasn't sure if you were going to keep going or if like you were done because based on your facial expressions, and granted it's not a real interview and I probably have other visual cues, but based on your facial expressions, it sounded like you wanted to keep going and elaborating, but were thinking, which is why I paused. Um, just so you know how I was, trying to go off of your
Oh,
vibe, if that makes sense. Now, basically, why I was pausing though was because I was hoping for a more defined result, right? Because basically, what I heard was there was a communication issue with Meals on Wheels, who's one of our partners for the events. So to help resolve that, I went face to face, and then I resolved it.
I missed that last part. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is good. You answered the question, right? And you were also able to show how you are able to creatively problem solve, think outside the box, right? If email communications isn't getting it done, then you'll go face to face. You're willing to go the extra mile in order to make sure that these things get finished, which came across in your answer. But when you're thinking about scalability, right? Like what if you have 5 different partners and they're all not talking to you, right? I'm sure Oracle is working maybe with like 20 different partners, right? You couldn't possibly go face to face to 20 different partners if they're not responding to you, right? And being like, hey guys, I got this big developer conference coming up. Like, where's my food orders or whatever, right? So that's why I was waiting for you to kind of wrap it up with maybe like a program that you build on top of this so it doesn't happen again, or like what types of partnerships you're developing maybe with other vendors and things if that vendor isn't giving you what you guys need in a timely fashion, then maybe you need to go find another partner, right? I was waiting for an add-on like that, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'm still like, for some reason, I'm still trying to answer the question in my own way, because I'm just trying to, like, there wasn't an end result, because this year for the voucher program, there's a change. There's not a change. Well, there is going to be a change in management, and what I did was actually I provided them with resources for them to use on how to use the computer and how to communicate with people how to communicate with us for next time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I
That makes sense.
basically gave them resources to use when working with us again, so that we can better work together.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think that was helpful for them, but hopefully it was.
Okay, so that's great. That's a really good example, and I would just add that to the end of your answer. That'd be perfect. Cool.
Is it okay not to feel? I'm sorry, I'm asking questions at the same time, and I know
Oh,
we have
please go
extra.
ahead. No,
Is
yeah,
it
because I'm
okay
sure everyone
that
can learn from your questions.
sometimes the examples that I may, everyone may have, it doesn't feel impactful.
Mm-hmm.
It seems so small,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're asking and you're trying to get to to scale a different level, and the things that you have done isn't really at large, but you know you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just at a larger level. So how can you find confidence in what you do, or yeah, how do you find confidence in it? Or like, are recruiters really looking for large scale things all the time, or are they looking for, or it just depends on the recruiter, right? Or I'm
No,
sorry if
and I
that's
think
not.
I think this is a like a really good question, and I just want to reiterate it for those in the chat or for those who are listening to this later. Basically, the question is, I think it's twofold. A is how do I pick what examples I should be using for each of the different behavioral questions that I get to make sure that it is at the appropriate scale or scope of what they're looking for. And B, the second part of the question that I think La Renee is trying to ask is, if you don't have that experience, but know that you could do it if put in that situation, how do you go about conveying that in an interview? Am I getting that right?
Mhm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the first thing is example selection, I guess is how you would call it. Basically, how do I know which example to talk about from my experience? For those of you who have worked for 10 plus years, this gets even harder because you have so many different projects and things that you can pull from. So where I always direct everybody is use your resume as a study guide. Which is why I highly recommend everybody updates and writes their own resumes because it serves two purposes. A, it helps you interview because you wrote your own you wrote your own resume, and also B, it helps you like basically catalog all the different projects that you've done. And because writing a resume is like a mini star exercise, you have to write the result in your bullets anyways. And so as you are brainstorming those and putting them all down on paper, you would naturally be able to find out what are your stronger bullets or examples or projects. And you're going to want to make sure that you definitely use those whenever you're doing all your interviews. Now, the caveat to that is don't fall into the trap where you use the same example multiple times with different interviewers because you're thinking, oh, that's a different person. They won't know that I've already said this to Sarah, who just interviewed me 5 minutes ago. They will. They will definitely know that you've used the same examples multiple times. So definitely try and change them up where possible. And B, I would say yes. So recruiters are looking for folks who have done projects at a similar scale and scope, right? That's what their hiring managers are going to be looking for, and that's ideally the type of candidate we would like to hire. So yes, it kind of does depend on the recruiter itself, but ultimately at the end of the day, we are going to want to see prior experience that maps to what the role essentially is asking for and looking for. So how do you do that, right? A, you either need to expand or build on the role that you have currently, or B, you go out and get that experience, maybe not from your direct role, but maybe from like some side project work or free internships or volunteer experience or something to that aspect. And then C, the other option is you would network a lot, but even still that doesn't necessarily make up for the fact that you may not have done projects at a certain scale, right? Like if Oracle is planning events for 10,000 people, and maybe that's a hard requirement, right? They need to have someone who has planned events of at least 1,000 people or something, right? Even if you were to do a bunch of networking and you become best friends with the hiring manager, like it would increase your chances, absolutely. But at the end of the day, they would still need to have someone who has planned events for, let's say, 1,000 people. So maybe you can get that from your current role. You're planning like the company's largest event or something like that, or you start your own event planning company, or you work for a friend who's an event planner, something like that. Just so you can say you've done a large scale event, right? Maybe you can help San Jose Convention Center plan something for free. I don't know. Or you go to Napa, right? You talk to some of the bigger wineries. I'm sure they would love a free event planner for one of their big galas or something like that, right? I don't know. I'm just trying to get creative and see if there's other ways for folks to get that type of experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Albert, should we wrap it up here?
Yeah, let's definitely look at wrapping it up for a little bit here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, why don't I just open it up for questions? I got the chat open. If anyone has any questions or comments, thoughts, any interview questions they kind of want us to go over anything you've run into recently from your interviews that is kind of puzzling you or nagging at you. We'll just wait to see, I guess, if any of that stuff comes through. But La Renee, how was this experience today?
And if La Renee had
Uh,
final questions, I think, as an interviewer, as
Yeah,
an
yeah.
interviewee to the interviewer, what would she ask?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that one more time?
As the interviewee, if Corey was a real interviewer for a job you were considering, what additional questions would you ask to get more clarity?
I'm not for sure how to answer your question, Albert. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Um,
So I think what he's saying is in an interview, we'd probably have maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the end for you to ask me as the interviewer questions. What questions would you, hypothetically ask me?
oh, I would first go off and start with what type of projects would I initially be working on? Is that
Mhm.
a good question to ask?
I think it depends, right? Like, how is that going to ultimately drive your decision of whether or not this role is a right fit for you?
Um, that's a good question. I honestly, I'm not for sure how. I'm just trying to think of what questions that I asked when I got hired at SourceWise, and I think I asked what would be my day to day, because that was really big for me. Like, if my day to day was going to be something that was very repetitive, because I had a couple questions about, like, because they said something about, oh, you're going to be on the phones all the time. So that was like one of the initial questions. So if you were actually from Oracle, I would probably ask, like, what are the current events that you guys are currently planning, and why do you need my help? Or with that, I don't know. I don't have like a blueprint of questions to ask.
That's okay. That's it's
Yeah,
totally fine.
yeah. I just feel, I don't know. I feel like I'm never gonna be prepared just based off where I've come from, and I'm just gonna word vomit. And I know we're on the time clock, so I'm just gonna be quiet. Yeah,
Oh
sorry.
no, it's okay. You'll definitely get there. I wouldn't be worried about whether or not you're gonna be able to execute and find the confidence to structure your answers. I think you're definitely going to get there. And I mean, you've gotten two good jobs in the past. So I'm sure other folks have seen your talent and your skill set. And so I definitely believe in you overall, and I think you will get there with some practice and a little bit of coaching. I think it's totally doable. In terms of the blueprint, what I would say is I would focus on three major topics, right? So one is the company or the culture itself. Two is your manager. And then three is the role or the job in which you're accepting. So I would try and formulate your questions around at least one of these three things to help determine if this would be like the right type of role for you. um,
Mm.
Hopefully that gives you like a nice place to start. You were talking a little bit about like you want to make sure that there's not too much repetitive tasks and things like that, right? So maybe one question you can ask is, in a typical given week for someone in this role, what would you expect their division of responsibilities to be? Right. And then they would say, oh, like you're going to have to be on the phone, you're going to have to, be coordinating with vendors, et cetera, et cetera. And then you could say, oh, that's fantastic. I'm super excited about, X, Y, and Z components of the role. What type of percentage of the time would you say I'd be spending on the phone?
Mm.
Right. And then he's like, oh, 40% of the time. Right. You're not saying, look, if this role I'm on the phone too much, like I'm not taking this. But if you're like, what percentage of time would you say is spent on the phone? Oh, that's very good to know. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Right. And in your head, you may know, okay, if his number is higher than 30%, I'm out. Right. Just as an example. So maybe that's something you can try and use. And I see that there are some questions in the chat here. Paula, hi. I have had trouble getting any interviews since I have limited experience and can only apply for entry-level positions. What can I do in the meantime to strengthen my resume? I want to get into nonprofit or education. La Renee, this is great for you. So, what advice would you give to Paula? What are
Um,
nonprofits looking for entry-level
I,
roles?
they're actually looking for your passion for their mission. So it's very important to pay attention to their mission and vision when you go research about their organization and what they do. And it's really important to attention pay close attention to the programs that they provide. That way, you can kind of structure your questions. Like, for example, with SourceWise, you can ask, how are you currently how are you guys currently trying to raise awareness about your about SourceWise as a whole? And then they can say, oh well, we're currently just going out to the community. Oh, that's great. At my previous job, I also were not only were we going out to the community, we were out actually inviting people to our Facebook page to view our to learn more about SourceWise, or to keep up in the know about what SourceWise is doing in the community. Um, how's your culture is pretty good too, because you want to know if it's a team working environment, or if it's going to be a lot of you working individually by yourself. And a lot of times when you do work in a nonprofit, most of the time you're always going to be working on a team.
Thank you. That's great.
And
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Sorry. Keep going. You're on fire. Keep going. So sorry.
And another thing, how the team, I think that was one of my questions. What is team dynamics? Like, is everyone for themselves, or is everyone someone to provide a helping hand? And one of the things that I was looking for is that I want to work on a team where I can come to you and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you show me? Or can you help me, assist me on this? And that's the reason why I chose to work with SourceWise, is because everybody is willing to give a helping hand. So if they are able to answer that question where they say, no, we don't really work on teams, then maybe that's not for you. And especially in nonprofits, you want to be on a team, because if I'm gonna be true and honest, when you work in a nonprofit, you're gonna be spread it out thin. So like you may be wearing a lot of hats within your position. So just keep in mind of that too.
Awesome. Paula, I would also say if you're looking to beef up your resume for an entry-level role into nonprofit or education, one of the great things about nonprofit is you can actually volunteer there without being an employee. So if there's one you're really passionate about, I would invest a lot of time as a volunteer there. And have you seen folks move from like volunteer roles into entry-level roles, La Renee, while you've been at nonprofits?
Yes. Yes. When I was interning, I could have went to work for my internship, but unfortunately I didn't live in the area at the time. But yes, most of the time you can move from a volunteering role into something into an actual role. I know MidPen does that a lot, and I
Oh, there
think
you go.
SourceWise may be doing that as well, because they just wrote out a volunteer program as well. So if you're looking, actually, if you visit the SourceWise website right now, you can sign up to be a volunteer and actually be working the department that I actually work in.
Boom. There you go, Paula. Thank you,
Yes.
La Renee. Look at that. Everyone is helping out everybody in Albert's list. I love it. I love it.
Will send you the link in this description.
Perfect.
But yes.
And then, Ken, what are some questions I recommend asking after the interview? I would avoid anything generic, like how's the culture? What's the team like? And to Renee's point, if you ask them a loaded question, like, do you micromanage, or are you much more open to being, to people's opinions? No hiring manager, even if they are a micromanager, is going to straight up tell you in the interview, yes, I micromanage people, or yes, or no, there is no collaboration and teamwork here on my team. Everyone's always going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. So I would word it a little bit differently, kind of make it almost like your own mini behavioral question. Like, hey, Mr. Hiring Manager or Mrs. Hiring Manager, I'm really I get a lot of energy from working on high performing teams, and I've noticed at my company, high performing teams tend to be those that have really open lines of communication. Um, what are some communication methods or philosophies you've implemented within your team recently? And then, of course, they've probably never been asked that question before. And B, there's no way they can make something up, right, to essentially tell you what you want to hear. So I would go a little bit more specific rather than generic. Like in the culture, if there's something you don't really want in your next company culture, I would find a way to kind of incorporate that into your question and be a little bit more specific. Because if you just ask, "How's the culture?" you're going to get a super generic answer, right? Oh, it's great here. I love working here. You know, this is so everyone here is so nice. That's not really going to give you what you're looking for.
Yeah. All right, I think that's it for questions. Cool. So thank you, La Renee, for hopping on tonight to do this. We really appreciate it. Thank you again, Corey, for spending time with us tonight to conduct this interview and show our community what kind of show our community what kind of work that we can do. That'll be it for this week. Next week, we'll have Grace Sling. Grace is actually on the line. She's a UX UI student looking to get into some of her work after graduating from her program. And actually, it's what's even cooler is that she's a Santa Clara University grad. So next
Nice, another Bronco.
next
Woohoo!
be an all SCU resume review. And so between now and then, ask your questions, figure out what it is that you're looking to do, see what it is that you'd like to learn, and we'll see you next Monday, hopefully around 6 o'clock, and hopefully Zoom will work a little bit easier next time. Until next time, thank you again for spending your time, and we'll see you all again soon. Have a great evening, everybody, and best of luck, and stay healthy and stay safe this week.
Oh, and real quick, if you guys have questions when you're watching the recording later, because we couldn't do a live session on Facebook, just mention me in the comment or whatever if you have a question, and then I'll be checking my Facebook periodically during the week, and I'll try and go back and answer as many questions as possible through the comments on Albert's list. So thank you.
All right, wonderful. Have a great night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.